Welcome back at WNST, Charleston, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are merging the streams here of the two websites. You will see that hopefully at some point before Patrick Mahomes takes the field on Monday night against Lamar Jackson. Luke Jones joins us now from Pennsylvania, where I'm hoping everyone votes, and certainly hoping at this point that Monday night goes in a better direction. Yeah, the more I've thought about this, Luke, and I've talked a lot about home field advantage and what it means in the new NFL, it does kind of suck that we're all not going to be down there screaming at Patrick Mahomes on Monday night when he's on third down.
Oh, there's no question about it, especially the last 2 years going to Arrowhead. 2 years ago, overtime. Last year, I think if you go back and look at that game, Ravens not quite as close as the final score indicated, but they were still in it to some shape or form. But yeah, not having 71,000 screaming at Patrick Mahomes and forcing those pre-snap penalties and making it difficult to audible at the line of scrimmage as the Ravens use that amoeba front with 7 or 8 guys and you don't know who's blitzing, you don't know who's dropping into coverage. That all goes away. And as Marlon Humphrey talked about it a little bit earlier this week, it really does just become about football. But and that means the game will still be very enjoyable. I think everyone's still looking forward to it, but it is missing that little extra pizzazz, right? I mean, you miss
the 12th man. I mean,
right.
Come on.
I mean, you miss that. I mean, whether you're the opponent going into the hostile environment or whether they're coming to you, I mean, that you do miss that, and that's something that we've talked about as far as this. In the midst of COVID and the pandemic and trying to play sports and navigate this, that element has definitely been missing, but making the best of it. It's a lot of fun, so much excitement, so much hype for this game. And, we saw, I guess Fitz magic is still a thing. We saw that on Thursday night as, I guess, the first appetizer to week 3, but I think everyone's hoping that we get the kind of payoff, probably similar to what we saw a couple years back, that Rams-Chiefs game. That epic, what was it? Scored into the 50s, I think it was, between those two teams. I don't know if this game will be quite that high scoring, but with these two offenses, it certainly has the potential to be that way.
Luke, this has been the weirdest week because, I went to the game last week, and I'm the only one that went to the game, right? Me and Jonas, and not spoiled or anything like that, but the game's a lot better in person. And I hear people, I see the game better on TV. I got my beer and my nacho. No, if you want to watch the game, man, my seat in the upper deck, I really miss it. I miss how good my football seat is in the upper deck, first row, looking down the center of the field. The home games, I've seen every home game but 2. I missed a game when I was sick a bunch of years ago, and I missed the one game when my wife was sick at home. So I've missed 2. It was the day Flacco got hurt. The Rams game, right? Was the Rams he got hurt at the end? I wasn't at the game that Flacco got hurt. Whatever game that was, I was in my wife's hospital that day. I've missed 2 home games ever. And I've sat in the same seat for every game. So I've watched 5 games on TV. I watched the Buffalo game last year. I missed a Pittsburgh Christmas game, a handful of games I've watched on TV ever. And I really, you don't see the game as well on TV if you're really trying to watch the game. And I texted somebody with the Ravens yesterday. I had a little line. I want to read it back to you to see if I'm as smart as I think I am. I said, if you can't see the secondary, you're not watching the game. You're just watching the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that makes sense. And it depends where you're sitting also. I mean, I could tell you I saw Ravens Jaguars 1996 in the closed end zone Memorial Stadium. I think I was the 3rd row. You couldn't see anything other than just that side of the field. But your point's well taken.
Teal and purple, right?
But that does speak to the difference, the contrast in watching it on TV and certain elements of it. You get certain insights when you're listening to it on TV. That the color and play-by-play guy, they have their production meeting with the head coach and some key players, and maybe you find out a few little nuggets that even some local beat guys aren't necessarily going to get. It's just a different level of access. But you're right in terms of, especially where you sit, end zone, upper deck, you do get that kind of all 22 coaches film look. That's different, but that doesn't.
If I'm going to go the whole season without seeing the game that way, It is an adjustment, man. I don't, that just professionally, tactically, and then how many things you can see. TV never showed the ejection on Sunday, and Jonas
Right.
and I sort of missed it, and we're on the moon, dude. Like, it's a great seat for a football game. It's a bad seat to see what's going on the bench. You know what I mean? When you're that high up, and when you're just watching the game itself, I miss that, man. It's the first football game I've watched where I'm watching it, and I'm taking your press seat in Washington next week, and that seat's corner end zone
That's
low.
terrible.
It's a terrible seat. So I'm
Terrible.
not going to see the game great. I miss my seat at a football game, and having been to 98% of the games in person, it's a better game in person. And I guess it's taken a lot of me to realize that, because I watched a million games on TV, Monday Night Football, whatever. I tried to teach my wife football when we first got married. Well, we met, then we got married, then it was the season. And I said to her, if you really want me to teach you football, we'll watch Monday Night Football, because I have no dog in the hunt. I can just watch it. And doing it on TV, it allowed me to stop it and start it and teach her football a little bit. But it was also I couldn't teach her. I couldn't see the secondary, so I couldn't really teach her anything. And I guess 17 years later, that the way television presents it and the way you need to see it to really talk about it after the game, it's just different for me. And I guess after 25 years, it took me. I didn't feel like I missed anything watching the first week. You were at the game. I was on TV. I'm like, okay, but then I was there last week, and now I feel like I really need to go to the games to talk about them professionally. That's my opinion after all these years.
Well, and that's fair. And I mean, they do have all 22 game NFL Game Pass and things of that nature. And depending on, I also think it depends on the analyst that's doing the game, because whether it's a Tony Romo or Louis Riddick on ESPN, guys that really understand the game at a higher level than the quote typical analyst. I think then that can drive some replays during in-game where they'll break down things that happen. You'll see a busted coverage and the quarterback misses it, or we saw it on Thursday night's game. Gardner Minshew was pressured and there was a busted coverage and he missed the throw. I mean, there's different things like that.
An example of that, Luke, would be my fandom in the front row at home, where when Larry Rosen or whoever's controlling that now, I don't know who the person is anymore, because I'm not in the building anymore, and I just don't know the people like that anymore. But whoever the Larry Rosen job is, the whole job was to not show a replay if it's going to screw you. You know what I mean? So sitting in the stands, I don't get a replay. In the press box, I get the game and I get a replay, which allows people like you and me to do this professionally at a different level. And I will say that to anyone. Like, why sit in the press box? I don't love the press box as a view or a place or the quiet or any of that. I do love the second look, third look on the TV screen, the view that I have. It's a bet. It really becomes a job on a Sunday, as you well know. Yeah. But it's also, you can do your job well when you're there, and you just can't on television. That's my professional opinion, having done this my whole life now.
And that's fair. And to bring it full circle to talking about this game, when you speak about the secondary, I think that's the big question for the Ravens with the Tavon Young loss. And we talked about this after the game. I don't think this is catastrophic for them in the big picture. I mean, they played without Tavon Young at a very high level last year. But when you do look at it in the short term, with Kansas City of all offenses coming to town, how is that going to look? We assume we'll see Marlon Humphrey in the slot like we did last year. We assume when they're playing more of their nickel, which has basically become the base defense for all teams, certainly the Ravens, we'll see Jimmy Smith probably back at that outside corner. But then once they go dime, which we know the dime has become so much more prevalent, what does that mean for the Ravens? My hunch, and this game might be a little bit different because of Travis Kelce and just how important it is to be able to contain him. And maybe Jimmy Smith draws that a one-on-one matchup and he travels with him. But with the dime package, I'm curious to see, do we see Jimmy Smith go back into that hybrid safety role that we've seen him in the first couple of weeks, and then Anthony Averett comes out on the field as an outside boundary corner, probably playing the shorter side of the field? That's what we saw them do against Houston on Sunday after Tavon Young left on the second series. But ideally, you'd like a couple weeks to iron out the kinks here as far as what your new normal is going to be in your secondary, rather than playing the Chiefs as kind of, being thrown into the fire pan. If you're talking about an Averett, you're talking about Jimmy Smith maybe going back to little more of a traditional outside corner role. But it is interesting. We've talked about this game, and so many people have studied what happened last year, what happened 2 years ago. The thing that really strikes me, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. 2 years ago, the Ravens came closer to beating the Chiefs at Arrowhead than they did last year, went into overtime. But you think about it, and I looked it up. 19 players played a defensive snap for the Ravens in that game. Only 8 are still with the team. The Eric Weddles and the Zadarius Smiths and C.J. Mosley's,
It's
those guys are
incredible, the
gone.
turnover, how quickly it happens right
No
before
doubt.
your very eyes
No
on
doubt.
good teams. I mean, these are good teams.
Well, that was 2 years ago. So Nestor last year, which last year was week 3, just like we're talking this year. So we're talking basically a calendar year. Only 11 of the 19 that took a defensive snap last year are going to be playing on
Well, it
Monday
would have
night.
been like
So
Josh Bynes and like a whole
Bynes wasn't
Earl
on the team
Thomas.
yet. That would have been Kenny Young. You're talking Patrick Owasso. You're talking Maurice Kennedy. Remember, they were banged up because Jimmy Smith had gotten hurt in week 1.
Well, the Michael Pierces and I'm just trying to think of
Tony
all those
Jefferson. You're talking about a lot of turnover. So the good news in that regard, if we're trying to look at this and say, okay, what's going to be different to help the Ravens get over the hump? Because everyone's focused on Mahomes and Lamar, understandably so, the last 2 MVPs. But I think it's very key for the Ravens defense. You got to slow them down a little bit more. And certainly you don't want to be in that position where you're falling behind by 10 or 14 points, because the Chiefs have proven time and time again they can do that. Not that you want to do that, but they can do that. The Ravens, what happens? We'd love to see that at some point, certainly, to see Lamar Jackson in this offense erase a 2-touchdown lead, but you're still trying to avoid it on a week-to-week basis, because that's not the game plan to try to win. That's not the blueprint for success for any team, including Kansas City. So to me, it comes back to the secondary. What looks different? Last year, the secondary that played, keeping in mind that Jimmy Smith was banged up, Humphrey got banged up, I believe, for a handful of plays, but they had Earl Thomas and Tony Jefferson at safety. Brandon Carr was playing corner at that point. Marlon Humphrey, of course, Maurice Kennedy, Anthony Averett. Chuck Clark was not a starting player at that point, and Anthony Levine. Clearly there's some turnover there, and you like the fact that Marlon Humphrey is on the field and fully healthy and able to play slot corner, which we wouldn't have known that a year ago at this time. But that's quite a bit of turnover. So who's going to be the X factors here? Is it Jimmy Smith matching up against Travis Kelce? Is it Marcus Peters doing his thing and he wasn't part of this defense in the previous 2 meetings? I think it's going to be so critical just to see, one, how they handle this disruption in their secondary with Tavon Young's injury, and 2, can you figure out the right formula as far as, we know how much this team loves to blitz. We know Patrick Mahomes does really well against the blitz, but if you drop into coverage, he does really well against that. So it's really more so than trying to figure out some magic, blueprint of success. I think with him, it's trying to do everything in moderation, but you have to do it at such a high level. It's going to be times where, you're going to drop back in the coverage, but there's going to be other times where you want to get after him. But if you don't get home, then you just know how much more vulnerable you're going to be on the back end. So, the Ravens secondary looks much different, but on the flip side, Tyreek Hill did not play last year. We'll see what happens with Sammy Watkins. He's in the concussion protocol. But we know Kansas City has no shortage of weapons. And now you throw Edwards-Helaire into that mix and what he's been able to do.
I call him the water bug. And
he's impressive. I saw, week 1, I guess Collinsworth and Al Michaels, I heard comparisons with Warwick Dunn. I saw a little bit of Darren Sproles in him, but a little more physical than Sproles, but still kind of that same, low center of gravity kind of guy. But that's another factor for them. So, it's not going to be easy for this Ravens defense, as talented as it is, as extremely well that they've played since acquiring Marcus Peters last October. They're basically number 1 in every meaningful statistic you can find since mid-October of last season. But it's a different animal when you're going up against Mahomes in this offense. So it'll be really interesting to see how they weather that disruption of not having Tavon Young. They're going to be fine long-term in that regard. They proved that last year. But again, it's not ideal when you have something like that happen and then next one up is the Chiefs and knowing what they can do offensively.
Luke Jones here, of course, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. He will be at the game on Monday night. I will be eating Royal Farms chicken or maybe some crab cakes from Fadley's on my couch. I'm not sure. We'll be doing that. But between here and there, we'll have a lot of radio here. And I talked to everybody in Kansas City. And look, I wasn't watching that game last week, right? I was at the game in Houston. I was scoreboard watching, and I think I pooped on the Chiefs in the third quarter and said, wouldn't it be a shame if they weren't undefeated when they get to Baltimore? I don't know. One way or another, they sort of woke up when they needed to against probably a bad football team, or what we probably assume is a bad football team. But they all said that the Chiefs sort of suffered from getting off the bus and walking into a brand new $5 billion stadium. Excuse me, billion was so last century. $5 billion stadium, and they were sort of sleepy. That no one being there. They had played a game with noise at home 10 days before, and
Right.
in the aftermath of it, I think the silence probably didn't do them well. This is going to be a weird one for you, right? Like, because the lights are going to be on. You're going to be over there. The place is going to be empty. The place glows when it's empty at night, right? And there's not going to be anybody there. I guess the Mo section's still going to be there. Hi, Mo. But the quietness of it and the Monday night part of it, that Calais Campbell saying, bring your own energy. Yeah. And I guess watching it on TV, I didn't sense the silent part of it. And I asked a question in the aftermath, I guess, to Andrews about communication on the field and the silence. But now that we're getting into this, there is part of this where, like, the biggest game of the year with no noise on Monday Night Football, there's a weirdness to it, but I would like to think that the Chiefs won't be asleep this time around. I'm guessing. My guess is it won't be 10 in the morning in California. And, who are these Chargers, and aren't those pretty uniforms? I mean, the Ravens are going to come out in black, ready to go 3-0, and the Ravens are probably pretty pissed off for greatness about all of this. And the Ravens have looked a lot more motivated than a lot of the other teams. And this means more to the Ravens, I guess, on Monday night. I'd like to think that would account for something in an environment and in an energy that we would be talking about right now as electric throughout the city. And instead, you're going to show up down there and experience what I experienced in Houston, which is just a whole lot of quiet. And then the game's going to start, and it's still going to be quiet. And that's weird, and I think that'll be weird for the teams.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's much more – I don't know if business-like's the right way to put it in the context of being a professional football player. It's more like practice. It's more like scrimmage. It's more like, think about how joint practices became such a fad again over the last 5 or 6 years. I would think it's a little bit like that. I mean, these guys know this. It sounds
like practice to them when they're talking to each other, right? Like,
no doubt.
And I would think the level of concentration – we'll probably see more great plays. You know what I mean? Like the Peters pick. Not that can't happen when it's noisy, but I think there's a natural thing about sound and the vision and how you can see the ball or not see the ball based on whether the stands are there. But I would think if we all went on the golf course and made noise, Tiger Woods probably wouldn't have been Tiger Woods, right? Like there's just a difference in it. And I would think some people, and we talked about this in baseball a lot.
I was just going to say, right.
That guys are going to improve because of this to some degree. Some guys are.
Others are going to suffer, though, because I think there's some who need that. I don't know if it's chaos is the right word, but I think it's – I've used the simplistic example of I struggle to sleep when the room is dead silent. I need some kind of ambience, whether it's a fan running or – a little bit of very soft music, whatever it is. I struggle in those environments where it is too quiet. I need something that, it just sharpens my focus a little bit more. I don't want it to be crazy, but I think there's some kind of element to that with some of these guys. I think you're right, respond really well. Maybe it's that rookie who would have had a little more stage fright who has now played a couple NFL games and he says, well, I played in front of more people in college, even at my, Middle Tennessee State or, wherever they played. And now they're in this environment where it's just like practice. Whereas I think maybe those veterans, and I'm not talking star players because the star players are, it's tough to compare the average guy to those types of individuals. But just say you're your typical 6th or 7th year player who's been in the league. He's a fringe starter, special teams, backup kind of guy. He goes through the motions at practice every week, not because he's not a professional, but he understands what's needed to get ready. but he gets amped up on game day, and you don't have that suddenly. So I could see it going one way or the other, but
Like the
I just
energy Anthony Levine plays with, right? Like to the crowd, he loves the crowd.
sure.
Like and I think the professional wrestler part of this, of
Oh, no
beating the
doubt.
chest for the cameras, can be a good time. They can still get that after they pick a ball off, and the celebration is for the cameras. But it's different. It sounds like a practice celebration, and you and I have heard that a million times, right?
Oh, no
The
doubt.
practice celebration, the noise that happens, after a big play's made, and on either side of the ball in the purple-white game, it feels like that. And I'm telling you, the Chiefs media people really felt like they lacked a lot of energy last week, and I don't think that will be unheard of in this league on a week-by-week basis.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see what teams adjust to that. I think you can always talk about the culture shock of, the first time I went and covered an empty Orioles workout back in July, and then the first time I covered I guess it was technically the second time after 2015, but covering an empty ballpark game. I mean, it's very jarring at first, but you do adjust to it, and I think that's what's going to be interesting to see how Kansas City adjusts. And to see how these teams adjust over the long haul. I've kind of looked at the Chiefs, and I did get a chance to see the very end of that game. I did go back and watch elements of that game. To me, you can kind of look at it one of two ways. One, you kind of look at Kansas City right now. Their offense has looked, I don't want to say ordinary, but it hasn't looked otherworldly by any stretch of the imagination. Even Mahomes, who has made the big plays he needed to at the end on Sunday against the Chargers, but statistically he hasn't done anything that's overly out of this world like he's capable of doing. Their defense hasn't looked very good at all. Certainly that's something that bodes well for the Ravens. So you could either say, well, maybe they're a little bit more like the Nationals than anyone thinks they could be. They won a championship last year. You always talk about how difficult it is to repeat. You're not having the same environment. Maybe you don't have the same urgency as, say, the Ravens. And, that would bode well for the Ravens on Monday night. Or you could say, well, they were playing the Chargers, division rival. It's a team that's given them a lot of difficulties, even if they've, still been the class of the AFC West in recent years. And maybe that's the game that sharpens their focus a little bit. And, they went through that sterile, quiet environment. They're going to be prepared for a quieter environment coming into Baltimore on Monday night. So you could look at it either way. But I think the thing with the Chiefs, we spend so much time talking about Mahomes and that offense. I look at their defense and what the Chargers were able to do with Justin Herbert at quarterback. They threw to their backs very successfully. Eckler had 4 catches for 55 yards. Joshua Kelly had a 35-yard reception. Kansas City's linebackers did not play well. They have really struggled early on. And Hunter Henry, the Chargers tight end, 6 catches, 83 yards. So I think you look at what the Ravens do well, obviously Lamar Jackson throwing to Mark Andrews, and knowing how much they use their running backs. Is this an opportunity to get someone like a J.K. Dobbins out in open space for Lamar to throw to him
By the
out of the
way, they did
backfield?
that successfully last week, except Lamar didn't see him.
Correct.
So
so it was there, right?
There was a
right.
touchdown there with Dobbins last week on the play that went across the middle to Andrews early in the game.
Sure. So it was there, and then you saw the Chargers backs making plays out of the backfield, and not just catching passes, but also the tackling was poor for Kansas City. So that's a defense that has not played well to this point. I thought they played okay against Houston in week 1 for periods of that game, but they did not play well last week. A lot of missed tackles, sloppiness.
Well,
They
we
didn't
would
stop the
expect this to
run.
be a little bit of a track meet, right? I mean, and I don't mean that, derogatory toward the Ravens, but Mahomes is going to get his 21, 23, 26. I mean, then it becomes,
At least.
Right. I mean, so this sets up to be 34-31 fourth quarter kind of somebody's going to kick a field goal. I mean, that's the way it's been historically. But then again, the Chiefs had struggles last week, right? And and the Ravens have been more stout than maybe we thought. I mean, maybe the Ravens defense is better than we've given it credit. Maybe it's better than it's been in a long time.
Well, I'll go back to what I said a little bit earlier in the segment. From the time that Marcus Peters joined this defense, I mean, they were fantastic last year. I mean, even the playoff loss, I mean, they were put on a short field.
But they don't have a reputation yet. The reputation's
Sure.
Lamar, right?
Yeah,
I mean, literally.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a MVP at quarterback, I mean, no one
Well,
else
the
is going to get as
reputation
much as
is
that.
Lamar and the kicker, and the
Sure.
defense will be okay
Here,
because they're the Ravens. They'll play defense, right? But not, hey, that defense is a top 5 defense. I don't know that they've been spoken about in that way because Earl Thomas, and because to your point, 11 and 19 are different. I mean, there hasn't been any continuity to talk about it as a great defense, right?
yeah, well, and that's where you're going to really lean on the secondary. I mean, that's where the money's invested. That's where the Pro Bowls with Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey, and yes, I know no Earl Thomas anymore, and you take Tavon Young out of the equation, but I want to go back to what you said about the potential for this to be a track meet, and that's very true. I think what you do worry a little bit about, and I think we saw this in last year's meeting with Kansas City in the first half, is the Ravens getting away from what they do best a little bit unnecessarily. I still think in the ideal world, beating the Chiefs, the best bet of doing that is still keeping Mahomes on the sideline as much as possible. And that's running the football and being able to dictate your tempo and chew clock and possess the ball and limiting their opportunities. Mahomes and the Chiefs are going to score points. They're going to make plays. I mean, you know that. But can you do it in a way where you're having 5-6 minute drives, assuming you're going to finish with touchdowns, kicking? This is not a field goal game. You want to score touchdowns, but can you do it in a way where you're able to control the tempo, the scoreboard's in your favor, and you're dictating to them rather than Lamar comes out throwing, and this is what happened. I mean, it can happen very quickly. This is what happened in the Tennessee game. The Ravens
And the
were
San
driving.
Diego game, right? Like when the offense starts to fail,
Yeah, I mean,
it's bad.
and that's not to say it goes off the rails entirely, but it only takes 1 or 2 possessions
And
and
you're
Patrick
losing
Mahomes,
14-3. Yeah.
and then you're completely out of your element as far as what you like to do. This is still an offense. While Lamar has become a damn good passer, and I want to give him full credit for that, this is still an offense that best operates when it's running the football and passing when they want to, not when they need to.
Not when they're
And
running 2-minute down 5
correct.
points. You
I
don't
mean,
want that, right?
they and to their credit, maybe they are going to be capable of doing that because they have run some pretty good 2-minute drills, even going back to last year.
But they haven't
With
had
throwing
to.
the ball, but they haven't. Those have typically been when the game's tied, or they're up 7, or they're up 10 to go up 17. I mean, the times, and it's been rare. I mean, let's keep in mind this is a team that hasn't lost a regular season game in a long, long time, but you're still in a position where you want to avoid falling behind 10 or 14 points just because, one, that's a low win probability scenario for anyone, and 2, you haven't shown an act for being able to do that in the way that Kansas City can. Kansas City falls behind by 14 points. Yeah, you're feeling great, but you've seen Patrick Mahomes erase those deficits on the biggest stages. We'll just go back to last January and February. But if you're the Ravens, you want to run the ball, especially considering Kansas City hasn't shown they can stop the run. So why would you deviate from that until they forcibly stop you, and then you're forced to throw the ball? But I mean, you want to play your game, and that's what it comes down to. And I think the Ravens have every opportunity to be able to do that on Monday night.
Luke Jones can be found. Baltimore Luke, you can find him. Well, you can't find him. You can only find him on the internet because you can't visit him at the stadium on Monday night. Not even me. Not even without a mask and gloves and Purell. I'll be watching from the couch. Luke will be our eyes at the stadium. Hopefully, I'll have the crappy press box in Washington. I would let you do the Philly game. It's my birthday weekend, but, I mean, there's pretzels involved. So, you know what I mean? There might be a little arm wrestling there. I got friends in Philly. Maybe they'll give us 2 seats. I don't know. Luke Jones is around. You can find him. He'll be covering the game. We'll be sitting watching the games on Sunday and waiting on Monday. And merging, WNST.net, AM 1570 with Baltimore Positive. We are Baltimore Sports and Baltimore Positive.